awarded the Torov Rafto Memorial Human Rights Prize to Ombudsman Adam Bodnar in Poland in 2018. And since then, the foundation has worked with a broad coalition of Polish and European partners, all concerned about the deterioration of rule of law in Poland and how it may harm the Polish and European legal system, and in the end, citizens both in Poland and in other European countries. The current government has, since 2015, undertaken to reorganize the entire legal system in Poland, to replace judges and prosecutors and secure control over any opposition within the system itself. Now, these efforts have been carried out by increasingly questionable means, and we are here today to protest one such initiative and explain why it is dangerous, why it should be resisted by any means available that do not cause greater harm, by the EU and EEA member states, and by us, the citizens of Europe. Judge Igor Tuleya of Warsaw District Court will tomorrow be subjected to a hearing that may deprive him of his immunity against criminal prosecution, a potentially devastating weapon for the suppression of independent judges. He is accused of making public a judicial ruling requiring the public prosecutor to continue an investigation into possible misconduct in Parliament. He is accused of addressing the Court of Justice of the European Union with questions about the compatibility of Polish and EU law affecting the independence of judges. And he is accused of contributing to public debate on Polish legislative reforms, claiming they undermine the independence of the judiciary. Now, it is generally recognized among lawyers and legal scholars that the first and second kind of actions are well within Tuleya's prerogative and indeed his duty as a judge acting not merely under Polish, but also under European law. And the third activity may be more difficult to consider, but we should all recognize as the right of every citizen, and perhaps even as a particular duty of citizens in possession of expert knowledge of a subject of importance to exercise free speech on such matters. In any case, every restriction of the freedom of speech must be very carefully justified. So this is our subject. Our speakers today are Judge Dorota Sabledowska of Danske District Court. She is herself subject to disciplinary proceedings for accepting a prize for promoting equality and for statements about hate speech in the public sphere. Then we will hear Professor Laurent Pech of Middlesex University. He is a prolific writer, both academically and for the broader public, specializing on rule of law backsliding. Thirdly, we'll have Judge Mikael Sjöberg, who is Vice President of the European Association of Judges, EAJ. Fourth, we'll have Felipe Marquez, who is President of Magistrates for Democracy and Liberty, MEDL. Then, to round it off, we'll hear from Judge Bogdan Jedris of Krakow Court of Appeal. He has represented Polish judges for many years in the International Association of Judges, IAJ, which includes EAJ as a member. But first, before we go to our speaker, let us hear Judge Igor Tuleya himself state in a few choice words how he sees the state of affairs for the courts in Poland and his own plight in the middle of it.
Jestem zwykłym sędzią. Od prawie 25 lat orzekam w Wydziale Karnym. Sądzę zabójców, oszustów, gwałcicieli. Staram się to robić uczciwie i najlepiej jak umiem. Dzisiaj za mówienie prawdy, za wydawanie wyroków, za respektowanie orzeczeń Trybunałów Europejskich, za pytania prejudycjalne sędziowie w Polsce są ścigani dyscyplinarnie i karnie. Stawiane są nam fikcyjne, kryminalne zarzuty. Na oczach świata niszczy się sędziów polskich, którzy są też sędziami europejskimi. Od 5 lat razem z moimi koleżankami i kolegami walczymy o praworządność, niezależność sądów, niezawisłość sędziów w Polsce. W obronie tych wartości jesteśmy gotowi zapłacić każdą cenę. Sędziowie europejscy, prawnicy z całego świata, dziękuję za to, że nas rozumiecie, że jesteście z nami, że nas wspieracie. To dla nas bardzo, bardzo ważne. To nam daje motywację do dalszej walki. Obiecuję, że będziemy walczyli do końca.
Okay. Tuleya is more comfortable speaking Polish than English, so my plan is to pass the ball on to Judge Dorota Zabłydowska, who can speak both for him and for herself and for the dozens of judges in Poland now subject to various degrees of harsh repression and harassment. So please, the word is yours, Dorota.
Thank you. As I said, my name is Dorota Zabłydowska. I'm member of the largest judges association in Poland, Justitia. I'm also member of the board of the association. And my job today, as I see it, is to make the case known to you, because it sounds so absurd that probably no one outside of Poland doesn't really understand what this is all about. So it all started in, I don't remember the year, but there was a large argument at the Polish parliament about a vote that was not properly done. And there was a case brought against the MPs to the prosecutor's office. The prosecutors decided, who are controlled by the Minister of Justice, who is Prosecutor General, they decided to terminate the case. And there was a complaint about that, and it went to the court where Judge Tuleya works. He was the one who recognized the case, and there was a hearing. There were media present, and there was the prosecutor present, and the prosecutor didn't object against the media being present at the hearing. So Judge Tuleya said that there were many irregularities in the parliament's actions, and ordered the prosecutor's office to continue with the case. And now the prosecutor, we consider it an act of revenge, wants to press criminal charges against the judge because he made his decision public. And that's pretty much the case. Another thing is that the court that is to recognize this motion from the prosecutor's office is also cannot be called an independent court. On April 8th, the Court of Justice of the European Union ordered Poland to suspend the actions of this court as far as disciplinary proceedings against judges are concerned, because there is a threat that it's not independent. Well, Poland claims that they followed this order because they don't recognize disciplinary proceedings anymore, but they go even further because they decide to recognize whether to allow prosecutor to press charges against judges, which is much worse because disciplinary charges are always worse than are always milder than criminal charges, which is quite obvious to any lawyer. So to make this clear, the disciplinary chamber of the Supreme Court, the so-called disciplinary chamber, is mostly formed of former prosecutors linked to the Prosecutor General, Mr. Ziobro. Today I read a resume on the life achievements of the so-called judge who is to recognize this case, of Igor Tuleya, and this person used to be a policeman, a prosecutor, then a trusted prosecutor because he had some high-level jobs with the peace government. And right now, after the disciplinary chamber was formed, he was appointed by the politicized Judicial Council. He was appointed to the Supreme Court, to the disciplinary chamber. So the situation is like this, to sum up my short statement. a judge goes against politicians and he says that they've done wrong. The prosecutor, who is dependent on the politicians because they can tell him what to do, the Minister of Justice, decides to press charges against the judge. And the person who will allow this prosecutor to press charges against the judge and continue with the criminal proceedings is a former prosecutor also linked to the Minister of Justice. So this is not just a personal case of Igor Tuleya. It's a whole system of Polish judiciary which is to be submitted to political power. And once the judges are vulnerable and are tried for crimes they didn't commit, there will be no judiciary, no free judiciary in Poland. And in my opinion, it will be the end of the European legal system as we know it. And that's pretty it. Thank you.
Okay, I had to unmute myself. Well, ending on the note of Dorotas, I'd like to pass the word on to Professor Pech, who has written extensively on how this situation in Poland might be a consequence for the European system as a whole. So please go on.
Yeah, thank you very much, and good afternoon, everyone. In my 10 minutes, I'm going to essentially go through quickly 5 issues. So the first issue is I'm going to briefly explain what type of rule of law, what do we mean by rule of law crisis in Poland very quickly, because not everyone quickly understands what's happening. Then second point, I'm going to recall the assessment of the European Commission regarding the new disciplinary regime put in place by Poland's ruling party. Third, I'm going to recall the assessment of the Venice Commission regarding the country's prosecutor office, following, again, changes made to the prosecution services in Poland by the ruling party. Fourth, I'm going to explain why judicial immunity matters in such a context, why judicial immunity is crucial, in fact, in this context. And fifth, I will explain, again, very quickly, why we need to take a stand and stand alongside Judge Tuleya, not because simply it matters, judicial independence matters for Poland, but because judicial independence is a sine qua non condition of EU membership. No judicial independence, no EU membership. That is the bottom line as far as I am concerned. So to begin with, very quickly, it's important to put it briefly and to put it concisely that we're no longer in a rule of law crisis phase in Poland, which started at the end of 2015 with the appointment, the unlawful appointment of individuals to the Constitutional Tribunal, and then the unlawful appointment of a president to the Constitutional Tribunal. So we're talking now about what I would describe as a rule of law, total rule of law breakdown. So we're no longer in a crisis phase. We are seeing a total breakdown of the rule of law. In this respect, let me refer back to what the former first president of the Supreme Court of Poland said a few months ago. And she was entirely right when she said the rule of law in Poland is no longer simply at risk, it is being erased. So we are talking about a new member state where the rule of law is being erased. I mean, I have never seen such a strong statement, but I'm afraid the facts do warrant such a strong statement. And in fact, the diagnosis of the first president, the former first president of the Polish Supreme Court was adopted by the president of the EU General Court 2 or 3 days ago, where he said in a statement which was made publicly available, he warned against the dismantling of the rule of law in certain member states where the political majorities are slowly but surely placing their courts under the tutelage of the executive. So that was a diagnosis of the president of the EU General Court. Now, let me tell you about the diagnosis of the European Commission regarding Poland's new disciplinary regime for judges and prosecutors. So this is not me, this is the European Commission's own assessment. We're talking about essentially a disciplinary regime specifically designed to punish judges on account of the content of their judicial decisions. So this is exactly what's happening here in the case of Judge Tuleya, but is one among many other judges who are currently being harassed subject to intimidatory tactics by Poland's ruling party. So we are talking here about a system entirely designed to scare, to bully judges into submission, and to subject them essentially to political control to favor the ruling party and associates. Now, this is a diagnosis of the Commission, of the European Commission regarding the disciplinary regime. Now, let me tell you about the assessment of the Venice Commission regarding the prosecutor's office. The two are linked. So it's important to understand that while the system has been re-engineered to subject Polish judges to political control, at the same time, the ruling party in Poland has also made a number of changes to the country's prosecution services. In a nutshell, and again, to just refer to the analysis of the Venice Commission from 2017. So we're not talking about a recent assessment, but we're talking about the assessment made by the Venice Commission in 2017. The ruling party has essentially resuscitated the old Soviet model of general supervision powers. In the same report, the Venice Commission stressed that the merger of the office of the Minister of Justice and that of the public prosecutor falls short of international standards and endangers the independence of the prosecutorial system from the political sphere, but also the independence of judiciary and hence the separation of power and the rule of law in Poland. It's difficult to think of something worse than this happening in the EU in 2020. Now, in this light, it's important to recall that the rule of law demands that the public prosecutor's office should not be permitted to interfere with judicial cases. This is exactly what's happening from my point of view in the case of Judge Tuleya. We have direct interference by the prosecution services, controlled de facto by the ruling party, to punish a judge because they find his rulings not to their liking. Remember the assessment of the Venice Commission in this context. There are no longer any independent prosecution services in Poland. Essentially, the Polish ruling party has decided, from my point of view, to use the prosecutor's office to make an example of Judge Tuleya. Why? To scare other judges into submission. What does the ruling party want to achieve? Essentially, he wants to prevent judges from going after the ruling party and associate, even when they are guilty of criminal activities. To protect judges against this type of external pressure, which is one of the most basic requirements of the rule of law, all EU member states have at least rules granting functional immunity to the benefit of judges. What do I mean by functional immunity? We're talking about immunity from prosecution for acts performed in the exercise of their judicial functions. Again, this is very much basic rule of law requirement. Without this type of rules, you simply cannot join the EU today. Obviously, it's a different story when then you corrupt the rule post-EU accession. In any case, it's also important to understand that this does not mean a lack of accountability as far as judges is concerned, because judicial immunity itself is not absolute. No one is denying this. For instance, no one is denying that judges can be faced with criminal liability for offenses committed outside of their functions. That's a given. They can also, judges can also be liable for intentional crimes committed during the exercise of their functions. This means, to give two concrete examples, that personally, for instance, surely no one would have any objection to judicial immunity being waived against judges promoting anti-Semitic views, or judges, for instance, after working for the government, involved in a secret troll farm, leaking private information to pro-governmental media outlets. Obviously, certainly in this context, certainly judges should face the consequences of their criminal activities, but surprise, surprise, in this kind of examples, judicial immunity has not been waived. I will let you guess why not. In any case, as far as Judge Tuleya is concerned, it's important to recall that the rule of law demands very strong procedural and substantive safeguards when it comes to the waiving of judicial immunity. Why? It's a very basic point, essentially. You need strong procedural and substantive safeguards to avoid a situation where judicial immunity is going to be waived by prosecution services captured by the ruling party to protect the ruling party from the illegal consequences of its actions. So this means, as far as I'm concerned, that Polish authorities are now acting in obvious violation of international and European standards when it comes to judicial immunity. These standards require, among other things, my time is limited, so I can only give you a nutshell version. Judges should have immunity from criminal prosecution for decisions taken in conjunction with their judicial functions. This is exactly the situation of Judge Tuleya. And any procedure for removing immunity of judges must itself be independent, which is obviously not the case as far as the bogus disciplinary chamber is concerned. So to conclude, whenever I read about the case of Judge Tuleya, and in fact the harassment faced by many other brave Polish judges, I cannot help but think about the modern version of the Moscow show trials. This is what we're looking at. Essentially, we're looking at Soviet-style harassment tactics used against independent Polish judges. We find ourselves in the absurd situation where the ruling party has decided to make an example of Judge Tuleya, hiding behind the captured prosecutor's office, who's also, in fact, the Ministry of Justice. Essentially, they're one and the same. It's the ruling party / Minister of Justice / prosecutor's office. And they're also hiding behind the so-called disciplinary chamber, which is, let me put it very clearly, not a court. It's just a body masquerading as a court, not even composed of judges, but individuals pretending to be judges when all of them have been unlawfully appointed. So, and to make a situation worse, to add insult to injury, they're also acting in obvious violation of the order of the Court of Justice adopted on the 8th of April 2020. They're also acting on the basis of an obviously unconstitutional law, which is in breach also of EU basic primary law, and also in breach, to add it all, to top it all, of basic ECHR requirements relating to Article 6 ECHR. I mean, you cannot make, you could not have thought of a worse law than the Mosel law, on the basis of which the bogus disciplinary chamber is going after Judge Tuleya. Judge Tuleya is eminently worthy of our support for upholding the rule of law rather than towing the party's line. And this is why I stand with Judge Tuleya today, and I stand with all the Polish judges fulfilling their duties against a ruling party which is totally out of control. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Peck. These are very stern, I would almost say frightening words. And I find them hard to refute, I'm afraid. I'll now pass the word on to Mikael Sjöberg of the European Association of Judges to give his opinion on behalf of his organization and its many members on how they see the state of affairs.
Thank you, Eva. Can you hear me?
Yes, perfectly.
Fine, and thank you for the floor. Thank you for letting me in. First of all, I should like to thank the organizers for planning this demonstration. It's the first electronic demonstration I've taken part in. We couldn't meet in Warsaw just like in January, but I think it's better than nothing, and I think it's a fantastic initiative you have taken with this demonstration. Let me say first, I more or less totally agree with the professor. I have nothing to add to what he said. I agree with him. But now I'll tell you that I represent the European Association of Judges, the biggest organization of judges in Europe, and Judiciary is one of our active members. We are totally apolitical. However, our main mission is judicial independence and rule of law, not more and certainly not less. On Saturday, the 5th of this month, the president of the International Association of Judges, Mr. Pagone, and the presidency committee, representing 92 national associations, made a statement expressing our deepest concern about the disciplinary case of Judge Igor Tuleya. The statement has been translated into a lot of languages: Polish, Croatian, all the European languages by now. And some associations have put them on their websites, I think most of them, and some of them have sent it to their governments. I, for myself, I've been to the Danish media today, in the Danish radio and the Danish television, and told them about this particular case. In the statement, we say a lot of things, but in the statement, we call upon the European Commission to seek interim measures from the Court of Justice to prevent the disciplinary chamber from the hearing. And we call the prosecutor authority to abandon the coming proceeding. The judicial independence is an essential cornerstone of democracy and the principle of EU, binding on all member states of the European Union, such as Poland. We are deeply concerned that the proceedings against Judge Tuleya seriously undermines fundamental pillars of justice, which is the right of the Polish people. A judge must be independent. As the Court of Justice has pointed out, that means not being subject to any hierarchical constraint or subordinated to any institutional body. That means, in practical words, not taking order from any source whatsoever, and that means to be protected against external or international pressures. If a state provides a judge his or her independence, one cannot be considered a judge as a judge anymore. The European Association of Judges has since day one relentlessly denounced the attacks on judicial independence in Poland. The contingents, alerts, and warnings of EAJ were several times taken in cooperation with other international institutions, and there's been several contacts with the European Commission and the European Parliament. And the European Association of Judges has, on its yearly events, sent several resolutions to the Polish government. However, despite all the actions taken, the decay of rule of law in Poland is worse than ever, which the case of Igor Tuleya shows. Judges can never be subject to disciplinary or criminal proceedings for executing their judicial functions. They have a right to speak, and they have a right, the European judge has the right to ask preliminary hearings to the European Court. Disciplinary proceedings can only be brought against a judge by a competent authority after a fair hearing and adjudicated and by an independent tribunal fulfilling all the requirements of both national and international law. The Polish disciplinary chamber, as it has been said by the former speakers, does not fulfill these conditions, and therefore we are deeply, deeply concerned. There is serious doubt about the independence of the disciplinary chamber, which is due to hear the application. Therefore, concrete measures must be taken, namely, we must keep calling the Commission to launch infringement actions. We must keep calling the European Parliament, and we must call on the European Council. There must be done something. As it was said, and I agree, Poland does not fulfill today the Copenhagen criteria to be member of the EEC or the EU. This demonstration shows that we will always be behind the democracy in Poland, rule of law, judiciary, and all its members. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Judge Sjöberg, or Vice President Sjöberg. I'd like to pass the word on to Felipe Marquez, who represents another broad and important alliance of professional organizations in Europe for judges.
Thank you. Good afternoon. It's an honor for us, for MEDEL, to be co-organizing and to be present here in this demonstration, this online demonstration. I would like to thank you, Eva, and the Rafto Foundation for taking the lead in coordinating all of us. And I would also like to thank Professor Pesch because for his very acute intervention, which we fully subscribe. MEDEL is an NGO that gathers currently 23 associations of judges and prosecutors from 16 European countries, which themselves gather roughly around 18,000 magistrates. And one of our characteristics is that we have not only judges associations, Justitia is also one of our most active members, but we also have prosecutors associations. One of them is a very active also prosecutors association from Poland, Lex Super Omnia. And one of the things I would like to say is that although the prosecution service is now unfortunately under control in Poland, which is a sad reality, we have a lot of brave prosecutors in Poland still fighting for the independence of justice and rule of law. And we must stand beside them. Their fight is also a very strong and courageous fight. We've seen, unfortunately, in recent times, prosecutors being attacked, some of them indirectly, some relatives of prosecutors having lost their jobs because their husbands or wives were members of the prosecution service, and they were courageous enough to fight this escalation on the attacks against the rule of law. This is not a recent topic. Long before this started to happen, MEDEL already in November 2013, when the European Commission organized the first Assises de la Justice in Brussels, we presented a contribution in which we alerted for the need to have some, or to realize that we already have some minimum standards in what regards the independence and the rule of law in the European Union. And unfortunately, the development of the events has come to show that that reality was unfortunately true. I would say that MEDEL has appealed to Polish authority over a dozen times for the period of the last 5 years. And what we've seen is that despite all those appeals, the situation only got worse. The process of deterioration of the rule of law is contagious. This is not new. Unfortunately, all of us, we could have seen this happening in Hungary. We could read the European Parliament reports about Hungary, and everything was written there, what was going to happen. And what we are afraid of is that many wannabe populist governments are looking to Poland, and especially to the reaction of the European authorities to what is happening in Poland, to see how far they could eventually go in the future. That is why this is so important. That is why the struggle of Polish judges and the struggle for an independent judiciary in Poland is so important. It's not just because of Poland, it's because of the whole of Europe and European Union. We are afraid that this may be a very strong virus that could spread all over Europe. We cannot allow judges to become ruling parties' puppets, like unfortunately we have seen happening in the Polish Constitutional Court. And we cannot allow that in one of the European Union countries, the executive is not subject to any kind of control, which is the case if there is not an independent judiciary. That is one of the problems. It's a problem of checks and balances. It's not a problem of judges, it's a problem of all citizens. It's not about the position of judges. As Professor Pesch was saying, the immunity of judges is not a problem or a right of judges. It's a question of fundamental rights of any citizen. The fundamental right to have access to an independent court, the fundamental right to see, to bring to see his rights upheld by an independent court, which is independent from parties and independent from the executive. In our view, tomorrow's action of the disciplinary chamber is a direct violation of the European Court of Justice's ruling. It's not a matter of wording of the decision. The decision is very clear in MEDEL's view. The decision forbids the disciplinary chamber to act in judicial cases until a final verdict of the tribunal is reached. So what we uphold is the statement that we made in the open letter that we directed on the 30th of May to Commissioners Reinders and Jourova. We reiterate that statement and request for an urgent reaction from the European Commission that must use all available instruments that are enshrined in the Treaty on the European Union. This is what we want the European Union to do. This is what we want the Polish judges to be protected from, is from any unlawful interference. They cannot allow disciplinary proceedings to be used as a threat to any judge or any prosecutor for that matter. And I would like to end saying something which is something we discussed about in Medel's board after the January March in Warsaw. It was quite an emotional moment, I must say. And it was very emotional to see ordinary citizens lining up in the streets, watching European judges from all countries passing by and saying thank you. And what occurred to us is that 30 years ago, we were watching Poland to be a light in the fight for democracy. So we were seeing Polish citizens coming to the streets and fighting for democracy, and being the for all other Europeans to uphold democracy. And what we are seeing now is Polish judges in this, what we need to do all over Europe. So instead of having Polish citizens saying thank you to us, maybe all of us European judges and European citizens, we should be saying thank you to Dorota, to Monika Frakowiak, to Christian Mankiewicz, because it's us that should thank them for their courage and for everything they are doing for us, because they are, once again, Polish citizens and Polish judges coming to the streets, shouting constitution and defending courageously the independence of the judiciary. They are giving us a strong sign of what we should do and of what all European citizens should do.
I'm really happy, Filipe, that you could express my own sentiments as clearly and strongly as you did. It is my personal conviction that this is not an East versus West issue. It's a common challenge to the system and the values we have, and our friends in Poland are fighting in the front line for all of us under very heavy fire. So we should all be grateful and we should all support them. There is time for a final word, and I leave that with Judge Bogdan Jedrec, who has worked for many years in the International Association of Judges and has seen this matter develop, and both in Poland and as we have responded or not responded properly outside of Poland. So please say what's on your mind and in your heart.
Good afternoon to everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fine. It's good to be with you. Thank you for having me invited. I really appreciate all what was said before me. I care for your good heart and what you do for us. But in the end, as I try to explain to you, let me put all that was first told in a little bit different perspective. My first question is, do moral values exist? On the one hand, it's thought that values exist. Moreover, they mark their presence in our life so strongly that we are entirely convinced of their existence. Values exist as an effect of human actions in the world. This way, objects become good or bad, beautiful or ugly, etc. Although a human being is the creator of values, the values acquire strength and seem to exist independently of objects and also independently from human beings. What's more, values begin to dominate over human life, determining the ways of behavior, actions, thinking. And man voluntarily accepts their dominance and proudly leads his life in the service of values, and it's even able to give his life for values. On the other hand, there are human beings who never say it openly. Nevertheless, they deny the existence of values in this sense and believe that the values can be faked by every man. They think that values are only a delusion and that values do not give a sense of importance to a man and aren't helpful in making right choices. According to them, they are only measures to achieve goals, political, financial, or other ones, so they are relative. We would rather put this view aside. Next question. What have we heard up to now here? We heard that there is an imminent threat of criminal charges to a judge who executed his duty with dignity, fairness, and respect for human rights and fundamental freedoms, which are discussed here, state at this stage of proceedings, translates into observing the principle of transparency and adversarial procedure. What we can say, hooray, okay, values and standards are fully observed. Values still exist and are in good condition. Notwithstanding, at some point, things are changing. The other human being denying his subordinate previous actions, decides to persecute a judge. For this purpose, he or she creates a prevailing value of secrecy. Public recognizes as suggestions. Values have become relative. Welcome in the delusive world. Who will decide the future of the judge in this delusive world then? The answer is at hand. They will be human beings who desperately want to be considered judges, but they are not. Despite much law created by politicians in their defense, they are not judges. Be a judge, in my means at least to be a skilled artisan. A judge carves human values in human beings. An artisan can't be substituted with a cowboy. Sophisticated chisel can't be substituted with a wrecking bar, etc. We can continue this kind of comparisons. In conclusion, tomorrow we will observe a live event. Tomorrow it will be decided whether our craft will be threatened with extinction or values prevail. In other words, tomorrow, it will be decided whether independent judiciary can be effectively undermined. The scope of this decision will go far beyond borders of Poland, since it may create a precedent which can be easily used by anti-democratic powers in other countries. Anyway, in the context of that, what I told, I think in the beginning, I think that you may say that I am a dreamer because I'm still hoping that the creation of real values is so strong that it will prevail. But victory is impossible without unity, which we present here and now. I would quote more. I hope someday you'll join us and the world will be as one. Thank you for having me.
That was lovely, Judge Igor. Just a minute or two to close this session off. Now on our poster, there's a long list of names of contributing organizations. And it's almost somewhat haphazard who we had the time to include because this was organized on short notice. It's part of the initiative of solidarity to hand over protests against these proceedings to Polish embassies around Europe, which is done today and maybe will continue sometime tomorrow. In Norway, Rafto has come together with the Norwegian Helsinki Committee, the Amnesty Norway, Human Rights House Network, ICJ Norway, the Norwegian Judges Association to raise our voice against this horrendous proceedings. MEDAL and AIJ has helped us organize this in a manner that fits with what takes place in Poland today. And of course, Justitia, and we have for years worked with many others, with Tennis, with Polna Sonda, and other partners. So I'd just like everyone listening to know that starting at 6 in Poland, a massive protest organized in dozens of towns with the aid of dozens of Polish civil society organizations will take place. This is meant as a small and feeble, but the best we can do right now to support this struggle, which engages a large part of Polish civil society, and not only on their own behalf, but on ours as well. There's not much we can do to directly interfere with the unjust decisions that we fear might befall Tuleya and his colleagues tomorrow and in the coming days and weeks. We're not even allowed to travel to Poland, and we have no formal legal authority, but we are the citizens, right? And I would encourage everyone, equally in worth as a citizen of Europe, to express their opinion about this. And one way to do it is to produce a little sign like this. Make a wall to protect Tuleya and his colleagues. A wall behind Igor. Murum sa Igorem. You can start looking it up on the internet, and you will find tens and hundreds and maybe soon thousands sharing this sign. So it makes a difference to our friends in Poland to see that their efforts are reflected in our symbolic contributions from the outside. So please join us and post on Twitter or Instagram or whatever social medium you prefer. And I'll close it off by this. Do I need to hold it a little higher, my colleagues say. And then I'm hidden. And then I'll say goodbye. Thank you so much, all of you. Let's stick with the news tomorrow. It will, whatever decisions are made will be in Polish media quickly, and in English, German, French media probably quite fast. So keep following the news and discuss this with your fellow citizens, wherever you are. Thank you so much for listening. Bye-bye.